Our first reader is Phinder Dulai, the author of Dream Arteries. And it's about a specific incident that looms large within South Asian Canadian historical memory. In 1914, a Japanese steamship docked and was held at bay. There were 376 South Asian migrants, Sikh, Muslim, Hindu, Punjabis, who were not let off the ship. This wasn't just sort of like docking a cruise ship off the coast of Canada. It essentially became an immigration prison where the migrants were refused food and water, almost in the hopes that their starvation would force them back to India. The book is an attempt to recover this moment and reimagine it in different ways, and imagine the sea lanes of migration as dream arteries, migrant veins, sea lanes that connect India with Japan, with Germany, with Canada. One of the most amazing things about the book is how it is suffused with acts of imaginative sympathy. Phinder writes a letter of fraternal love to one of the imagined subjects. He even writes a persona poem from the point of view of the ship itself. And in looking at these elements of empathy, empathetic imagination, he connects it to the reality that we live in right now, the one of the Oak Creek 6 shootings, and the one where in our current presidential election, one of the front runners has said that we should ban all Muslims from this country. In imagining and countering these acts of hate, Phinder Dulai's Dream Arteries is a book of migrant love. Let's give a hand to Phinder.
Hello. I'll just adjust this. Thank you so much, Ken, for that wonderful introduction. And you've pretty well covered a lot of the thematics that I've been kind of working through in Dream Arteries. I do want to thank the Asian American Writers Workshop and all of the good sponsors that have invited me out to speak to Dream Arteries. This is my first time to New York City, so it's really quite exciting. So I'm just going to jump in. This is an image of the passengers of the Komagata Maru, the SS Komagata Maru. It arrived in 1914, I think in the spring of 1914. It had 376 passengers. The gentleman just over here, his name is Gurdit Singh Sandhu. He was a Singaporean Sikh gentleman. And as you can see, most of the people in the frame are Punjabis with turbans on. And so British Columbia became quite a migration hotspot for Punjabis who came to British Columbia to actually work in the sawmills and the industry there. The link back to the British Empire was that many of them served actually in the British Indian Imperial armies. And so the first Punjabi Sikh officers that came through Canada were in 1897. So this is a really important community story in the community that I live in. It is continues to be a very present sacred narrative for the community as well as for people living on the West Coast. One of the things that I was exploring in Dream Arteries was the idea of how do you connect something that's self-contained as a sacred story into the broader realities of the world that we live in. And so that's what I attempted to do with anthropomorphizing the ship. And in that context, the interesting thing about the ship's history was that it was a migrant ship for thousands of European immigrants between 1890 to 1907. So most of my work in the archive was really looking at ship records and looking at the ship records of the ship when it was named the SS Dubnehoek and the SS Cecilia. And the ship at that time was owned by the Hansa Line and the Hamburg America Line and was situated in Hamburg, Germany. So there's a lot of interesting contrasts here in terms of arrival and leaving, and what was provided for those European migrants, and also what they were leaving and what traumas they were leaving. And so in this context, that's what I've been kind of trying to explore, is this idea of to what degree do you explore a sacred community narrative, but then you start deconstructing it and connecting it in other global contexts. And it really is a context to what's happening now, and what has been happening off the coast of Libya, what has been happening off the coast of Turkey, as well as off the coasts of Australia and New Zealand. People leaving immense traumas and extreme violence and pogroms that attempt to erase their communities. So I'm going to just ask the individual, what's your name again? I'm sorry. Hera? Hera, maybe you can go to the next slide. So all of these images, the other underlying context here is that these images are the point of one day when the Komagata Maru arrived in Vancouver. It was the one moment that that all of the press, as well as the government photographers and agents, were allowed on the ship to photograph the members of the ship. And so if you want to just kind of just roll through a couple of slides here, just to give you a bit of a visual. That's we can just stop there. Those are the images of the archival documentation. They're surveillance images. The Immigration Department in Canada was very much connected to the British India Home Office. It was connected to the British government in London. It was connected also to the U.S. government. And there was one individual that was the architect for a multi-national surveillance of one community in British Columbia. His name was William C. Hopkinson. He was an immigration inspector, but actually he was an intelligence officer. And he was deployed in Vancouver to spy on and surveil 5,000 South Asian Punjabi immigrants. So that's the context of what that moment in time looked like. So what I did was I went into the ship's history. So I'm going to just ask that we just go to the next slide. So this slide over here shows the point of departure for the Komagata Maru. Now this is the HMCS Rainbow. It was Canada's first Navy ship. So they deployed the Navy ship to force the ship out of Vancouver waters. And it was kind of ironic because they were actually using Canada's first Navy ship to remove British subjects from Dominion waters. And so that's always an interesting historical irony of this incident. So that's what that image is. Maybe we'll go to the next slide. Okay, so here's where I started kind of really looking at the ship, and then also looking at how to expand the story of the Komagata Maru. This is a rare image from the German Maritime Museum. I spent quite a bit of time trying to find this image. I went from Ellis Island Historical Society. I went down, I did an online search and connected with the Peabody Museum. And then there was a reference point to the German Maritime Museum for the SS Stubenhook. And so this is the SS Stubenhook, the same ship that was built in Scotland on the Clyde River. And it was specifically, this image is of the ship in Hamburg, Germany. And its name, the SS Stubenhook, is reflective of a neighborhood in Hamburg. But that's where it began. So I'm just going to begin reading some poems. A Ship's Story. I was born in the yards of Scotstoun shipyard, launched into the Clyde River and given a German name. The straight funnel of my body threaded skyward by taut cables webbing heaven bound. My body a glory of black steel. I moved at the fastest pace then. I am old now, and my sojourn near the end. For this voyage my new master purchased a second life. The old world exhausted me. I had already made more than 92 crossings between two worlds. In the new world my usefulness was extinguished. Tomorrow will be the parts of the sum, feeding the salt water, the debris that was my body. Each part of me I will offer to the unloved, in hope my wards will be made complete, whole for another life, while my life escapes me. If you were to admire me then, do so when I was beautiful and strong. Do so when my name was young. Do so even now as I return the unloved, delivering them to the rifles, the lathis, and jails of Britain's Bharat. Dies storik haken, this stubborn hook. We move backward against the clock on the high tide, our destination, my new life. On the quiet waters that kiss the bank of the Elbe, I understand now my body will carry the world. The river swallows me whole into commerce. We arrive as the day passes into evening, the port city's hand before me. A sepal of fingers close in, as my guide threads me through this bulbous foci of business. Waterways thick with human capital, the port opens up to me, the wharf and each berth a perfection of design. My body slowly eases into my transient home, my nautical journey just now beginning. Those looking for respite will be my friend. I will carry each burden for tomorrow and the days after. Maybe we'll just skip to the. Okay, so this is another image of the Stubenhook. It became the SS Cecilia. It was changed over to the Hamburg America line, and this is actually from the Ellis Island Historical Society. And again, it was a ship that made many journeys here and brought many desperate immigrants to the New World. So I'm going to read this one poem. It's called My Name is Cecilia. My name is Cecilia. You called me savior once. Archival note. Rusted tin box found snagged at the end of the Wakanai North Seawall, Hokkaido, Japan. Archival note. KM file 10038 HKS 95. Contents revealed. Item inside the box, sealed letter, opened and entered as record. For tomorrow, then, and the days after. To my friend Ellis. Ellis, my friend, you have a rotund capacity for irony. You are kind enough to remember me from before. Sometimes you listen to my weariness. If you were to ask the questions who they were, then I would tell you who they were clearly. They were Russian and Ukrainian families swathed in scarves, patriarchs with stiff straw hats and hard eyes, families escaping the unspoken programs, losing their old names, solitary Greek and Italian boymen, ready-made laborers walking into tomorrow's progress in the corner end of a New York moment, anchorless, unknown citations misidentified, women, men, and other, always an invitation to invention and lineage. Young women, eyes glisten against the spectacle of arrival, departure, and arrival. The emptied-out lives of the recently widowed and orphaned, one remaining family member leaving behind graves and grave names with no bodies, while deep in the hills the moldering ash marks a dead disease. Whole reconstructed families find the dark hull, the last sanctuary, rusted and ready, homes on stone pavements, the smoking walls of Masovan, evacuated homes, dust prints toward the desert, the trek that conjured up dreams of bayonets and axes and execution, names removed from lives, silence brought to lips, an erasure of neighborhoods during the summer heat. Each loved survivor arrived in La Havre, Samsun, Smyrna, stepped into my body, papers full with fiction and fact, names true and less true, anonymous and deceased ones now with new life. And those who survived, Agopian, Phonagian, Malhasian, Merdakian, Tukulian, a manifest ship laden with fact, fiction, and forgetting. One or more lost, driven, seeking solace of an emptied mind, tear ducts swollen, salt water for the journey. On arrival at the center, many replied, Nothnich, Nothnicity, blank, gained amnesia, disembarked into a future. So I'm just going to read one or two more poems, and then I'll kind of finish there. This one is actually connected to the gentleman I was speaking about, William Hopkinson. So at some point, there was an individual in the community who's now considered a martyr. His name was Mewa Singh Lapoki. And Mewa Singh was a mill worker who had come to Vancouver in 1906. And so as part of the surveillance, the things kind of got really escalated and heated and violent. And so Mr. Hopkinson, the inspector, sent a couple of the spies to go into the Sikh temple in Vancouver and kill the head priest, as well as a couple of other people in 1913. So Mr. Mewa Singh decided to take justice into his own hands, and he murdered Hopkinson actually in the courthouse in Vancouver. And Mewa Singh was a very quiet individual. But the thing that was really interesting looking at the court records was he provides this 2-page testimony that is full of the reasons and the specifics about why he did the act that he did and for what reasons. And for a person who was neither a community leader or considered a person who was on the vanguard of the revolutionary movement, his action and his testimony was just so eloquent, even through the translation, that it became part of the community story. But it also kind of inspired me to write this one poem. One of the notes that he kind of identifies, or what his wishes were, was to speak to 4 members of the clergy so he could explain his actions. So this poem is called Psalms to the 4 Clergy. I walk the 4 corners of life where there are 3 places of absence. My name is route in the language of solitude, where the dawn meets King Edward. The smell of cedar and sawdust are my comforts. The touch of my cotton is a ½ centimeter away from the cloth of your Lord. Each morning the day's arc meets me halfway. Each path is my thin straight line between meaning and unmeaning. Each day I write my life in the margins of my faith. Each Sunday I enter the walls of my gurus. At the house of meaning, silence seeps into me. Each day I hear the cackle of judgment and the close quarters of each day's work. Each hour my silence is the rain-drenching cobblestones, these hours of back and forths. Is this the nowhere spot, the absence, the place, the cavernous eye, as the distant crackling light stabs across the sky, while the thunder moans around us? What bleeds into the confluence of these interests? To the 4 clergy, I am a man between friends. My teacher returns to ash. The architect was draped with a flag last week. Your city mourns him. I await the gallows. The knot of my destiny awaits me. My pinched esophagus constricts without mourning. I shall gladly have the rope put around my neck, thinking it to be a rosary of God's name. My dead hands will carry my burdens in hulled silence, as this town carries its sadness when the winter rains fall. Quiet faces, downward glancing. I am a murderer in your eyes. I walk with intention. Thank you.
I should add that you can read some of Phinder's poems on our online magazine, The Margins, as well as some poems in reaction to the Gadar Party movement, which is contemporary to